Coming to you from the greatest city in the world, this is the #1 showbiz podcast. It's Talk for Two. Here's your host, Matt Bailey.
Thank you, Gary. Welcome in to another episode of Talk for Two, and thank you to our season sponsors, Axtel Expressions and the Tangent Bound Network. You find fantastic podcasts at tangentboundnetwork.com, and all your entertainment needs are at axtel.com. I know I do this at the top of every episode, but I'm telling you, I cannot speak highly enough of both of them. Now, I have been excited about this episode for a long time since we recorded it. What can one say about Tony winner Jefferson Mays? Not only is he extremely talented, as anyone who has seen his work knows, but he is also one of the nicest guys in this business. And I found that out personally when he came down to Lower Manhattan to do the interview with me. Mays began his career on Broadway in 2003's I Am My Own Wife, which brought him a Tony win at the 2004 ceremony for Best Lead Actor in a Play. He portrayed over 40 characters in that piece. He then went on to star in a number of Broadway shows from Pygmalion to Blood and Gifts. Most recently, he played the entire Dysquith family in the Tony-winning Best Musical, A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder. And for those of you who haven't seen Mr. Mays on the New York stage, you may know him as the medical examiner turned murderer, Dr. Carl Rudnick on Law & Order Special Victims Unit, a recurring role over the last few seasons. Here now to tell us about sustaining injuries in the theater, some that don't go away, our interview with Jefferson Mays. Tony winner Jefferson Mays, welcome to Talk for Two. How are you today, sir?
I'm very well indeed, thank you.
Thank you so much for meeting us in the Performing Arts Building at Pace University. This is going to be a fun conversation and a rare treat to get to do something in person. I want to begin at the beginning. You were born June 8th, 1965, as Louis Jefferson Mays.
That's correct.
Now, is Jefferson a nickname growing up, or did you choose that as a stage name?
No, that's my middle name. And for some reason, Mays men always go by their middle names.
Really?
I don't know why I was called Louis. My father was Louis Victor Mays, and he hated Louis. And so for some reason, maybe it was a character-building thing to give me a name I wasn't terribly fond of. But we've always, gone by our middle names.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, I got to know, what sparked your interest in theater and in acting, and how old were you, if you can remember?
Gosh, when anyone asks me that question, I think it must have been from my parents. I grew up in a household with no television in it. Mm-hmm. And we weren't Amish or neo-Luddite or anything, but I remember actually distinctly the black and white portable set fell off the table sometime during the Vietnam War.
Oh, wow.
The family basset hound was running through the room, got tangled in the cord, and it smashed, and it was never repaired or replaced. So then my parents got this idea of passing a family novel around the dinner table after dinner, and we all would take a turn reading.
Yeah.
And in my, illiterate stage, I couldn't do that, but I would do a little riff on whatever we were reading, act out an imaginary, a scene that sprang to my imagination from Great Expectations or David Copperfield or something from James Thurber or Mark Twain. But I think that was my first exposure to theater, because there's nothing more inherently theatrical than a person, my mother and my father, telling a great story to a captive audience. So the act of reading aloud was strangely theatrical. And I remember my mother would change. Her face would change, her voice would change, depending on what character she was reading. And it was so bizarre and not a little unsettling to see this woman who was so familiar to me morphing into Uriah Heep from Great Expectations, or Magwitch, or Uriah Heep from David Copperfield. And that was riveting. And I thought, I want to do that someday. So I think that was my first exposure to the theatrical.
Theater from a book. That's now I'm curious, because you did grow up in Connecticut,
Yep.
and it's just a train ride to Grand Central. First Broadway show you ever saw?
I think it was, I went to a lot of theater in New Haven at the Yale Repertory Theater and Long Wharf when I was very small. My first Broadway show was Brigadoon at the Majestic Theater, I think. I remember having a really harrowing, it was my first trip to New York by myself, and I had this harrowing walk up from Penn Station, up 8th Avenue, which was a completely different place back in the late 70s or early 80s. And and it was very, 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 very scary. And then I arrived in the beautiful lobby of the Majestic and saw Brigadoon. So that was my initiation to Broadway.
Wonderful. Now, you've said, I have to make comment on it, because you've said that you've talked about this in other interviews. You talk about your parents and coming down with them on the train, and that they were always so well dressed, and you're so well dressed now.
Well, thank you very much.
That
well, coming to New York was an event. I mean,
Yeah.
my parents, did dress up to come to New York, to go to the theater, go to museums, to the opera. And so as a family, we would all put on our best clothes. We sound like a bunch of sort of toothless hayseeds having the big city experience. But it wasn't that at all. But I do remember coming into Grand Central Station before its renovation. But it's still is, a glamorous place. And then my mother, which I think I said in another interview, would intone the theme to a radio show she listened to as a child back in the early 1940s, and it was called Grand Central Station. Mm-hmm. And she'd say, like, Grand Central Station, crossroads of 1,000 lives, underneath the glitter and swank of Park Avenue, 1,000,000 dramas enacted daily, or words to that effect. And that was how we used to come in, up the stairs, and I get sort of goosebumps thinking of it to this day.
Were they supportive when you said, this is what I want to do?
They were never supportive. No, they were never discouraging. Mm-hmm. But they were never encouraging either. I think they regarded it as an inevitability if it was going to happen, and why push me in that direction or pull me back.
Yeah.
What will be, will be. So they were always very, very proud and very supportive, but certainly didn't push me towards a career on the stage.
And how often would you come into the city to audition?
I didn't.
Really?
I had no intention of becoming an actor, really.
Oh, what was your intention?
I had no idea. I went to Yale College and studied classics, Latin, Greek, art history. I guess to become an academic or, teach Latin in some school up in Massachusetts somewhere. But I had no idea. And then I just fell in love with the theater extracurricularly. And it happened everywhere at Yale. It was done on loading docks, in squash courts, in dining halls, in courtyards, lots of site-specific work. And it was not supervised by the faculty. So it was a bunch of kids coming together, doing a play, blundering their way stupidly through it, hideously miscast, but it was the best way to learn something. You weren't trying to please a teacher or get something right. It was just a bunch of, clever kids trying to figure things out.
Wonderful. What broke the door open for you on Broadway?
Well, my Broadway debut was Alone in the one-person show I Am My Own Wife.
Yes.
In 2000 and, what was it? Autumn of 2003 we opened, and then it ran through 2004. Yeah, so that was my first time on Broadway. I never thought it would be in a dress and completely by myself. But.
Well, you were in a dress just recently on Broadway, so it
yes,
seems to
I
be...
can't stay out of dresses. I was in a dress on television recently too. I don't know. There's this sort of transvestite thing that's haunting me.
Really, yeah.
I like dresses. They're very comfortable.
Well, let's talk about I Am My Own Wife by Doug Wright. Mm-hmm. Now, how did you approach so many characters? Over 40 in all, I believe.
I think so, 37, 40, yeah.
How'd you do that?
Well, I had the great good fortune of being involved in that project before a word had been written on the page. I just got this call out of blue from my good friend Doug, who said, how would you like to be in a play that hasn't been written yet? And I said, absolutely, what's it about? He said, it's about a gay East German 65-year-old transvestite. And I said, sign me up. That sounds like a great next project. It was the sort of thing that you just could not imagine for yourself, or sit down with your agent and say, you know what I want to do? So we went out to Sundance with Moises Kaufman of the Tectonic Theater Company, and the three of us just sat in this little cabin on a stream in the Wasatch Mountains and started reading through pages and pages and pages of transcripted interviews that Doug had conducted with Charlotte von Malsdorf, this East German transvestite who survived the Nazis and the communists, living openly as a crossdresser. And he felt guilty asking an entire cast to come out, wasn't even sure he was going to use them, so he just had me reading all these different voices. So it was an accident.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then but then we thought, this sounds strange, crazy, but it just might work. She was such a strange little shapeshifter herself that it made sense that the story be told by one person, morphing, shifting into the various characters of her life.
It's interesting that you say that it was an accident, because it seems like sometimes when you, I don't know how it is, and we'll get to Gentleman's Guide towards the end of the interview, it seems like when you would want to take on so many characters, it would seem very intentional. So when was the decision made? This works.
Well, I think shortly after we started working, we did a presentation of Act One, I think at the end of our heady 2 weeks together, and people responded to it, so we thought, why not carry on in this vein?
And the decision to bring such a different, unique story to Broadway, what was that like?
Yes, no, nothing else was like it, certainly, and a lot of people thought it was just crazy, that this was and I thought it was crazy. I remember finishing the play in La Jolla the next year and thinking, this is great, it's going to run in some little storefront theater below 14th Street, be seen by a handful of people, and then, that'll be it. Fine, I want to do it. But never dreaming that it would go from Playwrights Horizons to the Lyceum Theater on Broadway. But there's no explaining the success or failure of anything in this business.
There isn't.
I mean, there isn't. You cannot second guess it.
No.
Things happen or don't.
Now, that is the show, your Broadway debut,
Yeah.
that won you your Tony.
Right, yes.
You can't dream of this stuff, right? When you're
No,
just in the middle
there was,
of it.
yes, it was lovely. I'm glad. I think I was at the ripe old age of 30. How old was I? I have no idea. I must have been in my late 30s, 37 something. Had it happened to me, as a young person, 19 or 20, I'm not sure what I would have done after that. Probably would have been paralyzed.
Wow, that's crazy. And I have to, this leads me into the next show. I don't know how many shows after, just looking at the different things. Blood and Gifts. Mm-hmm. You seem to have this knack.
Did you see that?
No, actually, I was not able to see that. One more thing before we go on from I Am My Own Wife. I don't know when Charlotta passed, but...
2002.
Yes, so before it came to Broadway.
Yeah.
But were you working on it in a time that you could have met her? And
yes, I had every intention of meeting her. I think tickets were purchased to go to Sweden, where she was living. But then she died, and I have mixed feelings about that, because of course I would love to have met her. But there's a certain value in having a certain degree of aesthetic distance from your subject matter. If you're too close to something, maybe even know too much about something, it's hard. It's confining. It's hard to be free. So I don't know.
It's interesting. The most recent sort of thing where people are playing real people is the People versus O.J. right now on
Right, that's
TV.
right.
And none of the cast, to my knowledge, wanted to meet their real-life counterparts. Cuba Gooding Jr. I don't think met. I think
he had like a chance encounter with him before all this started, just in a bar or something.
So it's interesting. It's interesting because to the layperson, and I mean I've done theater, but to the person who's never done a biographical piece, you'd think it'd be the opposite. You'd think, I want to get inside
follow
of
them around, yeah. Well, it would be such a strange meeting because you almost have to be like a Jane Goodall, on a blind, watching the troop of chimpanzees. You want to be, you'd want to go and sit in the person's living room and follow them around and not speak to them. Just observe, take some notes, record something. It would be really unsettling to have an actor studying you. Because when you're engaged in an interview such as this, we're talking about something else. I'm not, working on my Matt Bailey impersonation, which I think would be really good, ultimately. But,
I think we had the same hair.
I think so, yeah, absolutely.
So let's get to Blood and Gifts. It interests me looking at your career and the shows that you've done. You seem to have a knack for really interesting, unique pieces that make it to Broadway. Blood and Gifts being an international relations piece, which you don't see a lot on Broadway. What drew you to that project? Yeah,
that was actually off Broadway at Lincoln Center.
Oh, yes.
A good friend of mine wrote it, J.T. Rogers, and he's one of these playwrights, very much like Doug Wright, in that he is drawn to subject matter. He doesn't write about what he knows, writes about what he doesn't know, and what enrages him, what vexes him, what confounds him. So he was trying to come to grips with the United States' strange and complicated history in Afghanistan. And when someone's so fired up about the subject in that way, it's very hard not to want to follow them there. And I hope to be working with him soon on another project.
Here's a question. With all that's going on in the world, do you think 10 years later it would have a place on Broadway again?
The Blood and Gifts would?
As a revival?
It could well do, yeah.
It's important. Why do you think we don't get this kind of political in the theater too often?
Well, I think it puts people off. I mean, Blood and Gifts had funny bits. But it wasn't exactly satire. But, you know, the old saying, satire is what closes on a Saturday night after opening. Yeah, I'm not sure if today's audiences have much taste for the political, much stomach for the political. The political theater is going on television and on the radio right now. I mean, you cannot get much more wildly, outrageously theatrical than Donald Trump. That's an extraordinary show. How do you put that on stage and
love
still
to see
be believed?
You play him. I'd love
that would be
great. Man, Jefferson Mays as Trump.
I remember doing a very old play from the 1920s by R.C. Sheriff called Journey's End, which was a play about World War I. Took place in an officer's dugout. It was a play based on his own memoirs as a young officer with the East Surrey Regiment. The audience would have had no interest in it. Critically, it was beautifully well received, won the Tony Award for Best Revival. The cast outnumbered the audience at the Belasco some nights because we were in the thick of warfare, you know, on two fronts, in Iraq and Afghanistan at the time. They had enough of it on television and did not want to see a bunch of Englishmen, you know, being blown to blazes by the Germans every night.
Is theater more successful when the political message is subversive?
I think so. I think it's a difficult thing to talk about political theater for me. I mean, when it's heavy-handedly political, I think it ceases to be theatrical. This is only my opinion.
Yes.
And when it wears its political agenda so obviously on its sleeve, I think art is when it happens, when people are left with a message or perceive the message on their own. They're not beaten over the head with it. I don't think that's terribly artful. It has to sneak up on one.
Wonderful. That's a wonderful place to switch gears to the craft. To the craft, and this is the question I got from one of the Pace Performing Arts students, actually. Now, you did some. I think Hirsch was doing the math. Some 2,000 performances of Gentleman's Guide, specifically.
Wow, I'm not sure if that math is correct. I think I might have said that.
Half that, 1,000, yes.
Yeah.
We were conjecturing
Let's
at
say
lunch.
1,000. I mean, counting out of town and, you know, various workshop productions and the Broadway run, which was over 900. Yeah, close to 1,000.
Especially with A characters, we'll dig into that towards the end. But how do you keep it fresh, those objectives, and chasing those goals every single night, doing the same thing literally hundreds of times?
Yeah, I think theater actors are kind of obsessive-compulsive to some degree, in which we just thrive on the repetition of it. I never tired of doing that play. Physically, I did tire of it. I mean, my body is in a mess right now. I mean,
yes, I know of your damages.
You do. You have a list of my damages.
Well,
excellent.
You list them all.
I think so. Probably too often. I think my wife is sick of it, But anyway, yes, I do have war wounds. But the fact of the matter with theater, it's a new thing every night. It's a one-off. It's an event that will never happen again. You will never tell this story to this particular audience. And that makes it always new, always fresh. Because every audience that comes has its own collective identity, its IQ, sense of humor, field of interest, and we're all aware that this will never happen again. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event, and that's what enables you, I think, basically to come back and do it every night.
Wonderful, and it's wonderful. The trick is, and this is why I'm not an actor anymore, the trick for me was tuning into the audience but tuning them out at the same time.
Right, yeah, it is a tricky balancing act, isn't it?
It's very difficult, because I read that you were saying that at one point the stage manager had to interrupt the show at one point.
That's correct.
And you were so inside of it that you almost like exploded because...
Yeah, the reality you've constructed for yourself is
Yes.
suddenly shattered. Well, some heavily medicated and I think drunk patron came blundering in through the alley and started a big fuss and had to be wrestled to the ground by some stagehands. And then I was singing and dancing with Bryce Pinkham, and then the ASM came out and told us to stop. And it said, "What are you doing in Edwardian England?" But it was shocking.
Great line. Great line. So I'm glad that was going to be my follow-up, was did you say something in character to the stage manager, to the situation?
No, I think we went rather quietly off stage and then said, we got back into the scene somehow. There was some sort of ad lib that we did. Got a laugh.
Now,
but again, incidents like that remind you
please.
that this is the theater and this will never happen again, God willing. But, it makes the night special for everyone that was there.
All right, I got to get your feelings. This has been a hot debate. Theater and cell phones. That's
Yes.
such a problem. How do we combat it?
I don't know. I like what the Japanese had, that sort of cell phone frying system in their concert halls. Well, it doesn't, destroy them, but it renders them inoperable. But I don't think we can legally do that. Although I remember being a child and, a doctor leaving his pager or telephone number with the head usher or house manager, and then if a baby is being delivered, then they'll come down with a flashlight and the ticket stubs and say, "Doctor, you're wanted." So it can be very discreetly done. But anyway, the Japanese can just render them completely inoperable. However, during a musical, especially such a loud musical as A Gentleman's Guide, I could never hear anything, really. There was always music coming out of the orchestra pit, which obscured, noise in the audience.
Interesting. I will switch gears from the theater to television. And I was a fan of you after seeing Gentleman's Guide, but I really fell in love with your work after Law & Order, Dr. Carl Rudnick.
Oh, yes.
I said, that's when I was like, I need to have him on this show.
Oh, lovely.
So I hate to ask, what's it like working with so-and-so, what's it like working with such and such, but that show has been on the air for 18 years. How did you approach coming into such a tight cast for, I think, 6 or 8 episodes across a couple of seasons? How did you approach coming into that group that was there?
It was an extraordinarily welcoming group. I think to be working in television, you have to be extremely nice and well-adjusted because they work such insane hours, 14-hour days, 5 days a week, longer sometimes. But they were, such professionals and such eager, welcoming people, and I think anxious, to have new blood coursing through the show. So it was a very easy transition and such a pleasant experience.
When did they say, because I know Dr. Rudnick had appeared a couple of times before they gave him that storyline. When did they say, Jefferson, we want to make you a sociopath?
That was right. I was taken into a little room by Warren Leight, the head writer and producer, and he floated this idea, which I immediately leapt on. Although the odd thing was, I thought, yay, I'm the medical examiner. I'm going to have a recurring role for the first time in my life on a television show. I'll come in, every couple of months or so and dissect, do a body, do an autopsy, and give testimony in court. Wonderful. I was trying to be the best Emmy I could be, an upstanding, hardworking, ethical man. And then they come up with the serial killer. So I don't know what I was doing. But obviously, I struck the writers as being sinister and up to no good on some level. So, but anyway, who could turn down being a serial killer?
No,
when it's offered.
Seems like fun. How do you get in the head of somebody like that?
Well, I watched the Jinx.
Yes,
and,
that's right. They based it off of Robert
right, loosely based
loosely
on
off
Durst.
Of Durst.
And then read some true crime fiction. What is her name? Anne Rule, I think, writes.
Yes.
Very compelling. Not fiction at all, nonfiction. Her time with Ted Bundy and that sort of thing. So it was distasteful, but really interesting.
Yes, let's see. Like having my, yep, we just covered that one. Will he be back? He was just on.
I don't know. They didn't kill me.
Yeah.
So there's always hope.
But no talks, nothing you can tease?
No. I don't know what the future holds. I was very naughty, escaped from prison, and had my ankles broken. So I have to recover and then do time before I escape again, I should think.
Yes. Now
Unless I'm resurrected as an attorney or something.
Yeah, well, they did that. They had you play somebody else.
Yes, I think I was on
Rudnick.
another, I forget, it was Law and Order, I think. Yeah.
I'm a big Law and Order junkie. I'm in a TV class here at Pace, and we have to write a spec, and I chose Law and Order to do
wonderful.
it. Actually, off of another Jarecki film, but that's a whole other story. We've come to it now. Let's dig in. Gentleman's Guide.
Mm-hmm.
Was the show developed as a starring vehicle for you, knowing your skill sets, or was that a workshop?
No, that was a workshop that I fell into back in 2009. I just got a call from the composer that thought I might be right for this material. The director he was working with, Darko Trezhnek, who went on to win the Tony for Gentleman's Guide, had worked with me before, and Darko very sweetly said, who'd be good for this workshop? Jefferson Mays. He, likes doing different characters. I think he'd be good. Because they originally, unlike I and My Own Wife, envisioned it as one actor playing the entire Dicewith family. So I came in, I met with Stephen Lutvak, who had never heard me sing, so I sang something at the piano, and then he said, fine, you'll do. And then I did a workshop and another workshop a year following, and then it slowly built into this.
Wonderful. Now, when it came to Broadway, how long were you expecting it to run, you personally?
Honestly, I thought it would be. I remember saying to Bryce, my co-star, it'd be nice to keep it going through Christmas. Get some presents under the tree, and then I thought January 15th, 2014 was going to be probably the end.
But then, so were those nominations, 8 nominations, 4 wins, surprise? Tony Awards?
The Tonys are always a surprise. I think I knew we'd be nominated for something.
Of course.
But yeah, that came as kind of a shock that we. I knew that if we lasted through the winter, then chances were good we'd be nominated.
Best musical.
Yes,
What was
astonishing.
that when they announced it? Take me through. What went through your head?
Well, the Tony experience is always a complete and utter blur because you do a matinee on that Sunday night. You come off the stage, caked in makeup and sweat, hurl yourself in the shower, get into your soup and fish. You're taken over to the theater. You've rehearsed there that morning, of course, to do your little number. And then, you get out of your clothes, into a costume, do a little thing in the opening, back into your clothes, sit in the seat, then they yank you out of the seat again, and you have to go and do the number, then you get back in your clothes and go back. So it's just perpetual motion. I don't remember anything about it.
Wow.
And until it was over. It's something, a happy memory in retrospect, but doing it was, I don't think I was as busy since I finished doing the show.
And you were that busy on the show. Go, adrenaline.
I was busier off stage than on stage.
Yeah, I was going to say, you almost lost a thumb. You hooked it.
I did. Oh, you read that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it got, no, that was ugly. I thought I was going to lose it. I was ordering my dresser, just cut it off. You can sew it back on at the interval.
So I'm curious, how did the ensemble, if they did it all, make your job easier? You had 8 characters to think about. How did the ensemble carry any,
Oh,
make your
gosh,
job
what a
easier?
wonderful question. The ensemble of Gentleman's Guide was a singular one in that it was very small for a musical, and everyone in it were these seasoned, mature professionals. We used to joke it was sort of a musical for middle-aged people, and so when you have that level of support and skill and years, you're sort of carried along. These people are Olympians. I will not call myself a musical theater actor because this was my first foray into musical theater on Broadway, but I stand in awe of them because they sing, they dance, they act, they go to the gym, they go to dancing classes, they go to singing lessons, and they're in constant training. Doing a play, you can arrive hungover, you can arrive sick, you can quite often do your best work in that stage. You sort of, when you're sick, you get out of your own way.
Yeah.
In a musical, you cannot do anything if you have a cold. You can't hit that note. So it's just a constant struggle to keep at top form, and to have that set of standards is an amazing thing.
Now, you sustained multiple injuries while
I did.
sustaining that standard. Are you better? Especially that numb
I am,
thumb.
This is still numb.
Really?
This is still can't feel a thing.
Oh my God.
But I will always, it's like the St. Crispian's Day thing. We will think of our wounds and remember Crispian's Day. But this and the tendinitis is still flaring up in this elbow.
Tennis arm.
Tennis arm. I don't
Yeah.
play tennis in the show or
Yeah.
in life. Very odd. But I think I'm coming back.
That's good.
To normal.
Now, it ended. I was surprised because I actually thought, as so many things go off before the holidays, I was surprised to learn it actually just ended. I knew it was ending, that it just ended literally just over a month ago.
Yes, that's right.
And in a previous interview, you said you weren't thinking about it because every night you still had a show to do. Now that it's over, can you take us through the last show? Tell us if you miss it.
Take us through the last performance.
Yeah,
That was
afterwards.
a performance like no other because a lot of fans came.
Yeah.
And supporters of the musical, loved ones and friends. So it was sort of a delirious rock concert experience of lots of screaming and sustained applause, and it was lovely. But even doing that show, you were still doing the show. And you couldn't really linger over moments or do something twice because it felt good. You were still trying to do the perfect show, which of course never happens. So again, I always had the sensation with I Am My Wife with I Am My Wife too, but just making the first entrance and then not being terribly aware of time passing, and all of a sudden the curtain comes down and it's over. Time does really funny, tricky, crazy things in the theater.
So then how did it hit you when the curtain came down?
It was very emotional. We had a curtain speech. All the principals spoke and thanked various members of the audience, and it was very emotional. However, the theater is such an unsentimental, brutal business. As we were leaving the theater, moments later, the crew was already tearing down the marquee, and my faces were all ripped off of the front of house advertising material. So it was just, yes, the beautiful ephemerality of theater. You can't get too attached to it because it's all going to go away.
So what is your next project?
Well, I can't talk about it, sadly. I'd love to, but they want to do their press release. But I have a couple of things happening in the spring and in the fall.
Oh, very cool. So then we'll close with my favorite question to close with. We've been closing with this question for over 100 episodes now. What is your advice to up-and-coming actors?
To up-and-coming actors, I think I would say do as many plays as you can. Find people that you love to work with, that you truly enjoy, and simply make plays with them. Now, this can be, something in your backyard. This can be something in the bike room of your apartment building. This can be something that happens in your dining room with an audience of 5 friends invited to watch it. But that, for me, was the best training I've ever had, is just simply making something together.
It's wonderful, and that's a wonderful place to end it. Jefferson Mays, please come back when those projects are announced.
That would
I'd
be
love to
lovely.
have you.
It would
Thank
be
you
such
so
a
much.
pleasure.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Jefferson. I hope that you will come back as soon as the public knows more about that top secret project. I speak for myself and my field producer, Hersh Ellis, when I say it was a real pleasure having you at Pace for our conversation. And by the way, to Hersh Ellis, thank you for keeping me on time and accompanying me while we did the interview. That's it for us this week. Thank you again to our season sponsors, Axtel Expressions and the Tangent Bound Network. Stay tuned to talkfor2.com as well as Twitter and Facebook for more from the #1 performing arts podcast. From our site, you can access our Amazon guest shop, where I've handpicked some of my favorite works from our previous guests. Reach out by emailing talkfor2cast@gmail.com and talk about us on social media using hashtag talkfor2. Signing off for Talk for Two, I'm Matt Bailey, reminding everyone out there to keep talking for two.
You can hear more show business interviews with the stars at talkfor2.com.